Those of you joining us, hello, welcome. Just asking in the chat, maybe if you could identify whether or not you have previous experience with Schoology would be helpful to know. All right, I'm also going to turn off the wonderful bell. All right. No need to worry about participation. We'll pull the attendance list so you guys can get clock hours. If you didn't register for this training ahead of time, we'll add you manually as well. So no worries there. Just by being here in Zoom, you get attendance. You get clock hours, one and a half hours of clock hours. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and begin. Feel free to use the chat, or there's not too many of us, so it's a nice intimate group. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you want to jump in as we get started. My name's Gavin Molitor. Oops, pardon me. I'm an instructional technology coordinator here. I work with the South Region schools, so that's Inglemoor, SAS, and ILHS, as well as Kenmore Middle School and North Shore Middle, and a whole bunch of the elementaries that are over in the Kenmore area. There's 4 of us tech coordinators. We're all very knowledgeable on Gradebook and Schoology and Synergy. But I was the original TOSA who ushered in Synergy as an online grading system for secondary folks and kind of learned it first and trained it out. And so I have a lot of expertise on it. But everybody's knowledge kind of in our team has come up over the years really well. So we're all very strong supports for you. And I don't expect you to necessarily walk out of this training going, I know everything about these systems and how they work. The idea is that you have a good orientation, you understand how they relate to each other, how they're supposed to work, and you get a good sense of how to set them up. And then you'll have good supports going forward, and we're always here to kind of help you out as well. Shelby is currently in bargaining, but she was going to come in and help out a little bit and just kind of talk a little bit about some of the, more procedural high level stuff with our gradebook, but I'll do my best to cover her parts as well. And just for Hannah, I think you just joined us. Attendance will be taken care of just by being in the Zoom. We'll make sure that you get clock hours for this. Do encourage cameras on and sharing questions and ideas. That's always good as an instructor to have feedback. I appreciate being able to see some of you. But that's not for everybody, and that's okay. There is an agenda. The first part is just looking at the 2 systems, Synergy and Schoology, and understanding their relationship. The second part, we'll get into the technical setup for how to set up both systems and make sure that they know how to talk to each other. I have a metaphor about a drawbridge and how that works to kind of sync the 2 systems together that I'll use. I'll show you a little bit about creating assignments, scoring assignments, and syncing them from one system to the other and how that works. And then I'll talk very briefly at the end about student progress and how students see their scores in Schoology and their overall grades in Synergy, and where you should kind of be pointing them for those 2 things. If there are some questions along the way, please feel free to throw them into the chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. Like I said, there's only 15 of us, so it's a nice small group. For some of you, this is review. For some of you, this is brand new information. So whatever you need, just let me know. I don't know if anybody in here teaches college in the high school, but that's kind of a unique situation. And we did some good work with that too. That's a very complex system where you're grading both for high school as well as for a college course. So if there are some questions towards the end about that particular situation, I can address those at the end. Okay, so why do we have 2 systems? What do they each do for us? These 2 systems, first, Synergy came on board. It's essentially our student information system. This is where we house all of our student data, course registration, teacher information, student information. It's where we house our transcripts, and it's where we do all of our state reporting. There are a lot of state mandates and state laws that we have to adhere to as a public school district, and Synergy allows us to maintain and manage all that data for all those different purposes. The big one for us as teachers is understanding that this is where grades go to be posted officially, and this is where transcripts live, and this is where all of our rostering and course information for our various platforms comes from. It all starts in Synergy and then goes out to other systems, and then in some cases, data comes back into Synergy. A lot of people refer to it as the SIS or SIS, Student Information System. The other system is Schoology, and very different. This is our learning management system, often referred to as an LMS. That's not Leota Middle School, it's learning management. The idea being that Schoology is a place for teachers and students and families to interact, mostly teacher to student, student to teacher. It's a lot of workflow. You create content, you create assignments, you pass those on to students. Students can complete that in a digital environment and submit things back to you. You can score things, provide feedback. Students can see that feedback and do something with it, maybe resubmit work. Families can see in to that as well to see different parts of that, not all of it. And then there's a little bit of communication that can happen inside Schoology as well. With all that taking place in Schoology, especially the scoring and the grading, we have to find a way to get those grades back to Synergy. We don't want teachers doing double entry or, that's a lot of wasted effort. So we have a system set up where these two integrate and talk to each other. And so Synergy sends all that student information to create courses in Schoology. Teachers and students interact with grades and assignments, and that data gets sent back to Synergy. And that's kind of how the information passes between the two. So Schoology is where you design coursework and materials, resources, assignments, provide feedback and scores. Just a quick kind of overview of how that data works. Synergy is where students are enrolled by your registrar. They end up in your counselors. You end up in a class at a given time period. That passes on to Clever. Clever passes it on to Schoology, and that's how your courses get designed. There's a couple different things that get hung up in August as we're waiting for all those parts to kind of click together. One is checking with your school to see if they've released schedules. Nothing can pass forward until your school admins say, yes, we're ready to publish this schedule. And even some changes might occur after that, but that's the big one. The second one is we have to turn all these systems on to say, yes, pass this information along. And we're still working out some of the kinks right now. So it may be a day, it may be a week before you actually see your classes and can start operating with them. I'm hopeful this will still be valuable as a recording. We may end up doing this training again later in the week or early next week as an offering, just because it'll be a little bit more relevant once courses are in there. But we do have a lot of other supports. And then in September, me and the other instructional tech coordinators usually make the rounds and touch base with staff out at schools as best we can to kind of support folks. But again, hopefully you've got some experience in your building and you guys can rely on each other to kind of get these things up and going as well. Okay, the one I want to talk a little bit more about is how data goes back from Schoology to Synergy. You're going to create assignments, you're going to collect those from students in the real world as well as digitally, depending on how you balance those two things. And then either way, you'll enter scores, or you might actually grade content that students submit back to you in Schoology. You manually sync all that data to Synergy. There's a little button you can press individually per assignment or for all of them that'll pass that data along. And then magic happens, all that data flows into Synergy. It may take a couple minutes, it may take a couple hours depending on internet traffic, but those assignments and those scores all show up in Synergy pretty seamlessly. From there, when it comes report card time, you go into Synergy. That's where you post grades with comments. Maybe you make an adjustment based on what you know about a student. If you need to overwrite a grade from a C+ to a B- because you know that a student, earned something more than what their scores are showing. That's kind of how the data works. This was, I think, a little bit better addressed by Shelby, but there's definitely some contract language around using these two systems. I don't have that contract language for you, but essentially the idea is that assignments get posted in Schoology, things can be scored there, and then grades are ultimately posted in Synergy, and that's where the official scoring happens. Some folks do just go right to Synergy for certain things, whether it's because they're using another third-party curriculum or they just prefer it. I don't think there is an absolute mandate on which systems to use when, but just knowing Schoology has all this learning management capability, Synergy is really just the endpoint for grades, kind of helps. This is just a quick view of a Schoology course. Let me back it up. I've added a whole bunch of assignments in here as materials, and then eventually students would see on their end those same assignment titles as well as their scores. Right, just a quick little look there. That's different from how Synergy looks, where you have the list of assignments here, and then this is just kind of an example of a student view or an overall view of a student's overall grade in that class. Okay, any questions about the two systems or the expectations? I will be sharing the video for today. I could share the slideshow as well. I also have a whole grading guidance document that's very rich with small snippet videos on how to, as well as other good content for kind of setting up gradebook stuff. So I'll make sure you guys have access to all those resources at the end. Okay, let's go over some setup steps. I would write these two steps down. This is the stuff that you only do twice a year. Maybe if you teach sixth grade. Do we have any sixth grade teachers that teach on the wheel? Yes, I see a hand up. Awesome. You'll do this a little bit more often because you have quarter classes. So where at the end of the first quarter, you would be setting up your second quarter classes. Most other secondary teachers would just be floating into the second half of that first semester. So you'll do it a little bit more often, which means you'll probably be better at it than most. And you could be a master for your school for the 7th and 8th grade teachers. But the very first thing is to go into Synergy and make sure that you create the assignment types that you're going to want, thinking from the end backwards. That's where grades are going to end up. The classic assignment types are homework, classwork, I think participation, and then tests and quizzes. Those are pretty traditional, pretty classic. We do see where people have gone a little bit more of a standards-based route, where as an English teacher, you'd have reading information, you'd have reading literature, you'd have writing, creatively, writing analytically, and maybe some speech and communication things called out. So you're more organizing your grade book by standard topics as opposed to by those traditional work formats. But they're all acceptable. It's just a matter of what fits for your situation. I always say the best thing to do is meet with your department or your grade level team and discuss how you guys set up your grade book together with those assignment types, because it's much more powerful when we're doing things in a similar fashion with the support of the people we work most closely with. So that's my recommendation there. Some teachers will weight their grades. For instance, classwork might be 20% of the grade, no matter how many points you earn, whereas tests and quizzes, assessments are 80% of the grade, so that they just carry more weight, more value. All that stuff you want to set up in Synergy first. Make sure that's where you go to create your assignment types and weight them. After you do that and get that figured out, then the next step is going into Schoology and matching those up, making sure your system in Schoology matches the one you created in Synergy. And I'll show you both of these parts. Okay, so this is step one. This is what Synergy looks like when you go to log in. I think through Clever is probably the best way to get there now. Click on Synergy. Usually you'll see your students in your class in your seating chart. And then when you go over to Gradebook, you can go to Gradebook setup in the drop-down menu. That's how you get here. So clicking on this little caret or this title will give you a drop-down menu. In Gradebook setup, you'll usually see some defaults here. And I think there's a way to create new assignments. If you're gonna start there, that's where I have, I think, a couple videos probably that could help, or a colleague might be able to walk you through that real quick. You can always reach out to one of us and book a consultation. We can help you get those set up also. But that's how you create the different assignment types, and then you can weight them here. So in this case, it's a 30% classwork, 70% quizzes and tests, and this person checked the box for all classes, so it's the same assignment type and weighting configuration. Any questions about assignment types or weights? Some people don't use weighting. It's just the total points, no matter what category. It all adds up to a simple, 2,000 points at the end of the semester, and however many you earned equals a grade. Other people weight it so that, one category has more value than the other. When you do that in Synergy, that helps when you go over to Schoology, right? So same thing, go through Clever, click on Schoology, find your course. When you're in your course, that same course in Schoology, you'll go down to the Schoology SysConnect tool down here on the bottom left. And this is how you build that bridge between the two systems, right? We have, I think, 4 drawbridges in Seattle, right? So it's kind of like there's 4 courses. I have to build that drawbridge for each course, right? The Montlake course, the Roosevelt course, the Fremont course, and the Ballard course. When you click on this SysConnect button, that's where you'll end up on this page. It might take a couple seconds to load, but you'll be on the syncing grades page. You need to move over to this configuration page. That's where you're building the categories in Schoology that'll match up. Welcome, Alicia. We're just walking through some configuration steps. Feel free to jump in if you have questions, use the chat. For some of this, it's a review. For some of us, this is the first time they've maybe looked at Schoology and Synergy. So, okay, when you click on configuration, that's where you'll see all the various assignment types that are in Synergy. Schoology has already pulled those in. There's going to be way more in here than you would care to see. There's a lot of clutter from past years, and so you kind of have to weed through that in order to find yours. Right, but here's where I found classwork and I'm matching it up. And so this is going to create that same category, that same assignment type in Schoology. Same thing, I'd come down here to quizzes and tests and I would select create that category in Schoology as well. All right, so I think I'm already talking about the bridge. So there you go. If you've already done this in the past for a course, sometimes assessments will be in that list to select from, but most of the time when you're working with a new course, you have to create that new category in that course. So that'll probably be what you select most often. And save it when you're done. You'll know that it was successful. You get this little message up here. And then the next thing you'll do once you've saved them is if you click on Gradebook Setup, I'll show you this in a moment, you'll be able to see those categories that you just created in your course. Are there any questions so far just about that setup step? Okay, the reason I use the drawbridge metaphor is because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, Synergy is going to pass these categories into my Schoology course. When I create assignments and score them, I'm going to sync that, and that's going to send all that data back across the bridge to Synergy, and that's how your Synergy gradebook gets populated without really very much effort on your part. Here's where, once you do that configuration, when you go to the grade setup, you'll see all those categories were created for you. And if you happen to have a weighting system, you can check this box and say, yeah, I want assessment 70%. I want classroom or classwork to be 30%, make the systems match. It's kind of immaterial whether or not you do that in Schoology, because you're going to turn off the visibility to overall grades in Schoology. This is an important step that I'll show you in a moment. Highly, highly, highly recommend that you do not make the overall grades visible in Schoology for students. The reason being is, even if you've synced everything over, there's often a tiny, tiny discrepancy, whether it's because one assignment isn't synced, you created it in Schoology, but you didn't want it as part of their overall grade, whether it's just a lag, right? Or whether it's a mistake with a due date or something. There's 100 reasons why there can be a discrepancy between the two. And all it does by having them both visible is create concern amongst students and families who are going to email you relentlessly asking why the two grades are different. Right? At the end of the day, when you dissect them, they're going to be the same. There may be a technical issue once in a while that we catch with a teacher, but for the most part, they match up. All the mathematics works out the same. So it's usually just a problem creator to have the grades visible in Schoology. The only difference in that recommendation would be if you teach college in the high school. We'll talk about how you create the college version of a course. But I don't think necessarily anybody is doing that in this group. So I'll probably save that for the folks who teach those courses.
Gavin, a quick question for you. So
Sure.
which buttons, again, can you remind me, do that make overall grade not viewable in Schoology?
Yeah, it's the next slide, I think. I was just showing this was the weighting categories for adding your weight system in here as well, which again, is kind of immaterial. The gradebook scale, again, this is immaterial, but I suggest setting it to the NSD traditional grading scale. That's our, our A, B, C, D, and I think now it's NC and the percentages, but students aren't going to see it. This would just be for your own records. This would help if you're going to look at both grade books to make sure that they're matching. You would want that output of their overall grade to be calculated the same way. However, down here, this is where you're going to change some settings. So by default, none of these things are checked, but this is our recommendation. Hide the grading category score columns, hide the overall, hide the grading period grades. And this is all documented with a small video as well in our guidance documentation too. So aside from today and this video of the recording, it also is documented there for your support.
Gavin, I have a quick question. So I am familiar with Synergy because before I left my TOSA position, that's all I was using was Synergy. And I was able to configure my own like standards-based scale.
Yep.
That did line up with the North Shore scale.
Yeah, you're talking about like a scoring rubric or a scoring scale?
Yeah, I had an 8-point scale. So
yep.
Is that something that if I were to click NSD, would it sync with what I have in Synergy?
Yeah, we do have documentation for this, but it might mean meeting with a colleague who does that same grading scale or meeting with me. You're
Okay.
Are you at IHS again?
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be just sitting down with me to help recreate that. I'm not going to go into it today, but
Okay.
you have these scales over here.
Okay.
These are different from this thing.
Okay.
They look the same because they're related, but this is what's the overall grade that gets calculated. Students got 10 scores in 3 different categories. All that gets added up and weighted. What's their overall grade? That's what you determine here.
Gotcha.
When you're scoring individual assignments, you'll use one of these. It'll either be raw scores, right? Numeric, which would either be 10 out of 10 or, a percentage out of 100.
Okay.
Or you could create an 8-point scale where an 8.0 is 100%,
Yeah.
a 7 is 93%, whatever
Yeah.
that scale looks like.
Yeah.
You'll need to create that in here and then
Okay.
use it to score, but that's different from the overall output.
Okay. We can talk later about that.
Yeah,
okay.
you can create that here just by clicking add, and then there's a little bit of technical steps to do it, but it's not challenging at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. 8's great. I don't recommend the 40-point scale where you have 4.0, 3.9, 3.8. That's a lot. That just seems like a nightmare to try to score things on that level. There actually is the ability to use rubrics too. I've had a few teachers do this. You could actually create a rubric scale if you're going to use it a lot. For instance, grading essays, I could probably come up with a 4-criterion basic analytical writing rubric that I'm going to use for a couple different essays throughout the year. Right. And then I can match that up and actually use it to score stuff and give feedback, which is kind of cool. Not a lot of people are using those, but it is a powerful grading tool. Okay. And then Andy, that was your question, were these 3 settings right here.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me just check my agenda. Okay. Any other questions about the gradebook setup, configuration stuff? What if I'm doing standards-based? Kristen, that was the setting up your assignment types in Synergy and then bringing them over and then using that scale you said. So those are 2 different things. I'll just briefly mention setting up the assignment types based on standards. That's assignment-based. That's an assignment-based grading practice. Setting up the scale with a 4.0 is a standards-based scoring practice, right? And you're using both of those parts to create a standards-based practice, right? When you introduce the criterion, then it's standards-based assessment. And so that standards-based word actually has a couple different components to it, which is kind of cool. So that seems to be the direction more and more folks are heading. And again, same thing, if you're going down that direction, I recommend working with your department. It's very powerful when you're doing that together with a group. Okay, how do I create the assignments that I'm then going to score and, actually build a grade book that's reflective of my students' abilities? Okay, welcome, David. Okay, so how does I want to talk about progress reporting and how that works. You're going to create some assignments in Schoology or, just on paper with students. And either you collect that back digitally in Schoology and score it, or you collect their papers back and score them. You enter a grade column in Schoology for those paper assignments, and you end up with a whole lot of data, right? All these different assignments in different categories with different scores. When you sync that data, it's going to show up in Synergy. Those assignments and scores get put in there automatically when you do that manual sync. And we recommend doing this, I think, on a daily or weekly basis. There is some contract language for that, that it happens pretty quickly, except if it's larger projects. I want to say the contract language between admin and the NSCA is like 3 weeks for projects, or sort of the standard thing for larger assignments. But however you do that, the idea is that you are in a relevant, timely fashion hitting that sync button to make sure that the progress reporting is up to date. Just a quick review of how you add materials for a course. Miranda and anybody else who's really new to this, there's a lot more information that we have that can support you for actually designing course content in Schoology. This is more just kind of the setup stuff. But just in the most briefest sense, when you get into a course in materials, you click on add materials here. This is where you can add a basic Schoology assignment. Students can type a response to that. Or you can add a Google assignment where you push out a template document or template file, like a slideshow. Students get their own copy of it. They can work with that and then submit their version back to you with whatever changes they made, as part of the work. You can also create quizzes. There's a giant quiz building tool in Schoology. We've had mostly good feedback. There are some quirks to it, but there's I think at least a dozen different question styles, from true, false, multiple choice, short answer, long answer. You can even create maps and clickable things that students can work with in there. A lot of prep and pre-work goes into building an assessment, but once you build it, you've got it. You can even share assessments with other teachers, build a master course, create all these materials in a master course, and then push them out to your individual classes. There's also a way that you can link classes. So for instance, both of my period 1 and period 2 courses are English 10. I can link them together so that when I create material, it's going out to both courses all at once. but then I have the individual sections where I can look at just period 1 or just period 2 for grading, and I can individualize them. The only other thing I'd mention, Miranda, for your benefit, anybody else who's new, you can assign things to individuals or small groups as well. There's a way to actually set up reading groups A and B and C if you're, differentiating by reading level or something like that. There's a way to do that and individualize it as well. And then adding a page would be just adding content information, a video link or something like that for students to view, but there's no assignment attached to it. Okay, and then this tool right here, there's a plus button up on the top of your gradebook where you can add a grade column. This is for those paper assignments or anything done more by hand or in class that's not digital. When you grade those, you can just create a simple column in your gradebook, give it a title, and then enter your scores there. That way you're always going to Schoology to enter and then syncing everything to Synergy. Very popular, especially in, I would say, like PE, where so much is observed and checked on a clipboard. Watching students go through particular activities. PE is highly, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It's just, it's well suited for documenting on paper gradebook a bunch of scores for students. And then either a PE teacher could go directly to Synergy and do that same thing where they create the assignments there and manually enter them, or they could do that in Schoology. It's their choice, right? I love that grade column because it allows you to be here. If you do even one thing through Schoology as a PE teacher, I want them to write a reflection about their volleyball skills. I want them to write that digitally in Schoology. I don't want to do 2 systems. I don't want to also then go to Synergy later. So I always say, I think Schoology is much better for that because it's much more flexible. You can do more with it, but there is the option to just use Synergy as well for that data entry right at the endpoint. There is one caution with adding a grade column, and that's that you make sure you add a due date. When you create a grade column, it doesn't give you the option to put in a due date, and that could cause some issues. So in this bulk edit tool, you can see all the data for these assignments that I've created over the course of a quarter. This one up at the top didn't have a due date. And so what happens when you hit that sync button, the assignment goes over to Synergy. Synergy takes all this data and creates the assignment. It knows that if an assignment was done on September 15th, that's going to be part of the first semester midterm grading period. If it doesn't have a due date, then Synergy says, I need a due date. I'm going to put it at the very end of the semester. It's going to choose January 15th. And that assignment is not going to be visible in that midterm gradebook. It'll look like it disappeared, but really it's already in the final mark. It's just not visible in both. So just know that the due date is really important. If you ever run into a situation where you're creating an assignment and it doesn't give you the option to do a due date, you want to come here to bulk edit and change that, or you're already in the second half of the semester and you don't care, it's fine. There's a lot of situations where people don't care and they just, as long as it's in the final mark, it's good. Or they'll specifically create something with that end gradebook because they're collecting it throughout the semester. Okay, you've created a bunch of assignments. You've collected work back from students. Some of it was digital. Some of it was by hand or in class. You've got all these grades in your gradebook. You're going to sync these to Synergy every week or day or however, whatever makes sense for the rhythm of your teaching. The first way to do that is just to click this big sync button right here. 2 arrows chasing each other endlessly. Right? Like star-crossed lovers or something like that. Right? I don't know if there's any English teachers in here. Sorry for the Romeo and Juliet reference. I can't help myself sometimes. This is a good way to do it most of the time. What this does is it syncs all new data that you've created in your gradebook over to Synergy. The emphasis on new data, right? The first time I create an assignment, the first time I score it, that's all new data. If I overwrite a score, that's new data. If I change a setting in the assignment details, it doesn't recognize that as new data. Sometimes if I change a marker like missing to did not complete or something, it sometimes misses that data. So every once in a while, we see situations where people use this bulk sync, and it doesn't always work in those additional situations. So it can be a little bit naughty at times. So what we prefer to do is, instead of clicking on that big button of the two arrows chasing each other, is to click on the sync log. This is a clipboard. And what that does is it opens up this pop-up, and we just say go down through each assignment and re-click them individually. That will send all data for the assignment, whether it's new or old. So in most cases, if you're creating everything cleanly, that bulk sync works. If you're changing data because students have resubmitted work and you've regraded it, or if you're changing a detail in the assignment because you accidentally made it worth 100 points, but really you wanted it worth 10. Anytime you do those kinds of changes, we say do the individual stuff. And if we ever work with you to kind of troubleshoot, this is what we'll do, is we'll come through and sync all these all at once. This is just another way to do that. When you're in your gradebook, let me go back here. When you're in your gradebook, this is where I would do it as a teacher most of the time, because I'm going to interact with the grades, the button's right there, good. But just know that that Schoology SysConnect button is down there at the bottom left. You can actually get there, and it's almost the exact same page. It's just larger. Same thing, right? Again, you have a bulk sync button as well as individual syncing options. Yeah, when in doubt, if something seems amiss, it could be an assignment didn't sync properly. But do the individual syncing. And then we love this bulk edit tool, which let me go back real quick and show you. These 3 dots right here, when you click on those 3 dots, one of the options is bulk edit. And that gets you this view where you can see all of your assignments and see all of the data all at once. So it's a really good place to just kind of double check your settings, make sure the assignments are all set up right, that the ones that you want to sync are there. You can uncheck that sync box. So if you're just collecting a data point, but you don't want it to be part of their score, you don't have to sync everything to Synergy, right? Some stuff you're just collecting and scoring for the sake of the student, not for their grade. People do this sometimes with like a syllabus. You collect a syllabus, you just want to know that it was collected. You give them points, but it's not really valuable academically, so it's not part of their grade, and people don't sync those things. Okay, any questions about assignment creation and scoring? These kind of details?
Sorry, so did you say with the published status, does that mean that it's visible to families on Synergy?
Yeah, if you sync it, it will be visible to families on Synergy. You can go into Synergy and make something not visible if you really need to, but that's probably pretty rare. The example I would give where it's meaningful would be if there is a situation where, let's say I assign something to just half my class. In Schoology, because I assign it to those individuals, it'll go to those 15 kids. The other 15 won't see it in Schoology because I didn't assign it to them. However, when I sync that assignment to Synergy, it becomes visible to all kids. There is in our directions a chance to go into Synergy and hide it from those other students. So it's a quick setting in Synergy, but it is an additional step. And that's just one of the limitations of having multiple systems. If you use the word publish, and that's slightly different, you can create a bunch of content in Schoology. I could actually have like my first 5 units all set up, and I can unpublish 4 of them because they're not relevant yet. So I publish the first unit, which has 2 pages of information followed by 3 assignments. And then when they complete that, I unpublish the second unit, and now all that new content is visible. If something's unpublished, it won't show up in Schoology and it won't sync.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Just a brief mention, we all make mistakes at times or realize for some reason we got to delete an assignment. The way to do that is delete the assignment first in Schoology. That cleans it out of there. However, if you already synced it to Synergy, it becomes what we call orphaned data. It's living there, but it no longer has its parent that was, where it came from. So what you need to do is go into Synergy and manually delete it there as well. So it's just worth knowing that that one deletion does not sync over yet. We've asked Schoology to develop that, but that's a Schoology problem, not a Synergy problem. So right now they say like, we're syncing data, but when you remove data, there's nothing to sync over. They need to figure out a way in their development to allow you to sync a deletion. So Synergy has said they're ready. They know how that works. That's a Schoology problem. But luckily we do have a way to delete something in Synergy that's been orphaned. If you click on an assignment title and go into the details for the assignment in Synergy, most of the fields will be grayed out like these. You can't change this information because it came from Schoology. It's synced up. It's partnered. What you can do is you can break that partnership by clicking this third-party read-only button, turning that off. It's basically in Synergy saying, I no longer want to listen to my parent assignment. I'm breaking free, right? I've got a 6th grader and this is freaking me out now because now I'm thinking about that time where she starts to pull away. But the idea being that once you do that, now that orphaned assignment, you deleted the Schoology one, it's gone. Now you can uncouple the one in Synergy and that will allow you to delete it and change its data. So we say it's your frenemy. The only time you want to use that third-party read-only is when you're deleting an assignment. If any other circumstance, and usually it can be problematic. So, but that's where we can also kind of support you and help you. If there's an issue in your gradebook, contact your ITC and we'll help you out. All right, yeah, so once you toggle that off, that gives you all the power back in Synergy to manipulate that assignment or just delete it. This is new information probably for everybody, unless you were in bargaining or already, saw communication about this. In the past, the 50% interpretation scale is kind of where the threshold was. I don't want to assume you guys all know what I'm talking about when I say an interpretation scale, so I'm going to back it up a little bit. There's a lot of research that shows that the traditional way of grading, where anything below a 60 is an F, is damaging to those students who tend to get Fs and struggle. Psychologically, it's damaging. There is a lot of research that shows when students reach a certain threshold, they give up completely, right? And we're not in the business of pushing students out. We want to make things recoverable. And the greatest analogy I heard to kind of understand this is what we're doing is, students are out in the ocean and some of them are swimming very successfully. Some of them have built incredible yachts and other crafts, right? This set of skills and things that keep them moving and above water and succeeding in that ocean. Other students are treading water very aggressively, trying to succeed, but having a struggle. And then there's students who are drowning. Right. And what we want to do is we don't want to lift the ocean floor so that they don't have to swim, but we do want to lift the ocean floor so that if they sink, they can get back to the surface. Right. And what grading does when you have 60% of the scale is failing is it skews students' grades towards the bottom. Right. And the simplest way to express this in mathematical terms are, if you take 2 assessments that have equal value, and the first one, the student fails completely, but the second one, they succeed completely, you've got a 0 and a 100 averaging together as a 50 and failure, right? And very often we talk about a progression of skills, right? There's all kinds of ways to make that second assessment more valuable than the first, or to bring it into balance, make the first one a floor of 50, or in this case, 40, that averaged with the 100 is now something more successful. A 40 and a 100 now becomes 70, right? So that's a very simple approach to understanding a much more complex mathematical problem. But those are the easiest points that I can make from my study of grading practices for why the interpretation scale is valuable. I had been advocating for this long before the pandemic, but it was the pandemic that ultimately brought this into fruition because of so much of the social, emotional struggle and psychological issues that we were seeing in our student population. I think there's still some rebalancing to do between how much accountability we have for students versus how much we gift them. I think that is not quite in harmony yet. But this move from a 50% floor to a 40% floor is actually, I think, part of that rebalancing effort. I think the 50 was largely perceived as giving too much to students. It made it too possible for students to do nothing and then do something small and pass. And so I think the negotiation between teachers, bargaining, and district leadership settled on a 40% as being more appropriate. Right. A lot of this is sadly experimentational, but we'll see what we get as a result. The idea here being if you enter a score of 0 or a score of 2 out of 4, which is below anything below 40% really in your scale, the interpretation scale and synergy will bump that up to 40%. And that way there's no worry about teachers accidentally or mistakenly entering something below that threshold. Right? So no student shall receive a grade less than 40% of the assignment's value. The way this worked in the past, for those of you that are familiar with it, the interpretation scale and synergy, you would toggle it on and off when you sync grades. It was kind of static. You turn it on, it turns everything into anything below 40 into a 40. But then if you synced new data, it wouldn't apply to that new data. And so you had to toggle it off and toggle it back on. That is hopefully no longer the case. We've worked with Synergy to make this a dynamic tool. We paid some thousands of dollars to have them develop this tool specifically for the way we wanted it to work. We are still in the testing phase, but based on the demonstration that they gave us of what we purchased, you should be able to turn on your NSD interpretation scale for your courses once at the beginning of the semester or quarter, and it will apply to all assignments that you sync over throughout. So that manual toggling on and off, we hopefully, fingers crossed, don't have to do that anymore.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
This is middle school. It's very new to me. And so,
Exciting.
yeah. And the whole grading thing is crazy to me. So help me. So if a student does not turn in an assignment, can I give them a 0 for not turning in the assignment? And that 0 now is going to turn into a 40?
Yes. So Melissa, what middle school are you at?
Kenmore.
Kenmore. Okay, awesome. That's one of the schools I serve as well. So hopefully I'll get a chance to connect with you out there.
Yeah.
In Schoology, you could mark it as missing.
Okay.
And what that does, I think it puts like a hyphen in the Schoology
Okay.
gradebook. Or you could mark it as a 0, right? Because they never turned it in. It's no longer missing. They can't redo it. Either way, you could mark it as missing, hyphen, or 0. When you sync that over to Synergy, it'll show up as a 0 either way.
Okay.
Right. The hyphen is what's called a null score, and a null score is interpreted as a 0 in Synergy. Because when you set up your gradebook for the beginning of the semester, you turned on that interpretation scale, that 0 will show up as a score, or the word missing will show up in Synergy for students and families to see. They'll see that. However, the interpretation scale changes the point value that's awarded for that 0.
Okay.
There'll actually be 2 data points for students and families. They'll see the score is 0 or missing, and they'll see the point value as 4 out of 10 or 40 out of 100 or whatever 40% is.
Okay.
Right. So both data points are visible. It works really well for communication. And it means you don't have to really manage it. You enter it the way you want to. You can choose missing or 0, and the interpretation scale should take care of it.
Okay. Thank you.
What some folks were doing was they would do the math in their head and manually enter the 40% score. And that can be a little bit misleading. So they would manually enter 4 out of 10 and then write the word in feedback missing, but students would see the score is 4 and then they're fine with it, right? Families would see the score is 4 and they wouldn't read so far as to see that it's also missing. So we don't recommend doing that. There are a couple cases like with long-term subs that don't have all the same access that a primary teacher would have, the primary teacher record has, but that's for a different group of people for me to talk to them about how to do it. So this change to the 40% is an update for this year. That is correct. I don't have the contract language, but I believe you'll most likely hear about that through Tracy Malloy or through your admin at your building if you're secondary folks. So I know it's somewhere. We're still working on getting that interpretation scale updated and revised, as well as testing as best we can the dynamic nature of that tool so that teachers don't have to do it. So there's still some kinks to work out, but we're getting there slowly. And Alicia, what did you want me to repeat? Or did I already repeat it? I'm going to assume we're good. If we enter, there it is. If we enter 40% in the gradebook, that messes up the math. No, you can manually enter 40% of the score. It's fine. The interpretation scale will only take effect if you enter something lower than 40%. So we just say manually doing that, it doesn't mess up the math. What I think it can interfere with is the communication with families. Right? So a missing with a 0 speaks more highly to the fact that there's work the student still needs to complete. Whereas entering a 4 out of 10 and then writing in feedback missing can often be overlooked, where a student sees that they got a score, they think they did it, they don't even read the missing comment, they just move on. Okay. Where this interpretation scale setting lives, that same place, when you click on the gradebook menu, you'll see a drop down to get you to gradebook setup. And then when you click on that, you'll land on this page. And then if you click on gradebook settings and scroll down, you'll find the interpretation scale. So we still have to update the language and the designator. I'm not sure if the old scale will still be selectable. We're trying to erase that so people don't accidentally select 50. But, you know, if you do, I guess that's just a benefit to students if you choose 50 instead of 40. Right? That's not going to harm any students if somebody accidentally chose the 50% interpretation scale. But again, hopefully you just have to select it once for your courses and you can move on. And this is one setting for all courses. You wouldn't have to do it for, you know, all 5 of your sections. Yes, it is something you need to turn on. It lives here. It may be possible that we set this as the default. I have not heard that that's possible yet, but that's for our SIS, our student information systems team to kind of figure out. They're the ones that have access to all those cool background settings that set this stuff up. So I'm sure it'll probably come into communication, and then you can always reach out to us and ask the instructional tech coordinator if you have a question once we get rolling in the school year. All right, to review, first thing first, set up your assignment types in Synergy, get those established with a weighting system, maybe work with your department or your grade level team if you're doing that as a group. Second, go to Schoology. Do that setup stuff with the configuration, build the drawbridge, change any weightings, turn off visibility for that gradebook, and then start getting into adding materials and eventually scoring things come, you know, that 2nd or 3rd week of September when you get your first look at assessing students' capabilities. And then don't forget, syncing is a manual operation. You'll want to do that in some sort of routine. I love Friday afternoon syncing for the weekend. Families like that too. Maybe not the kids, but providing good data for parents who are involved to make a decision as to whether or not their student can attend their friend's, you know, slumber party versus do some work is powerful stuff. So all of this, really, the goal in mind is to have good data that we can use to help students figure out whether or not they're succeeding and enlist family support. That's the goal at the end of the day with all of our scoring and all of our assignments. That's the point. Give kids good feedback, good, strong feedback, do it in a timely way, and make it visible to enlist family support. Okay, so that last part with the family communication, what do all these grades look like on the student end and the family side? And what we have are two things. I want to talk about the overall grade, which if we've set up things correctly, students don't see their overall grade in Schoology. They only see scores and feedback. When you go into your gradebook in Synergy to post grades or just see how things are kind of mounting up, you'll see this view in the back where you have your student roster and then you have an overall grade and maybe a percentage or points depending on how you make it look. You'll see all the assignments, you'll see all these data points, and that gives you all the information you need to say, yeah, everything I created in Schoology and collected by hand and entered is now there. I like how these grades look. I'm ready to post them and do the posting process. Throughout the quarter or semester, when students or parents go in, what they'll see is this view, right? They go into student view or parent view, they log in, they click on the gradebook icon, right? They'll see a list of their courses, they'll click on a course, and then they'll see an overall view of their grade, how many missing assignments they have. And then down at the bottom, there'll be the list of assignments as well as the score, 0 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 12 out of 10 if they did some extra credit. And then they'll see the points. That 0 would show as a 4 out of 10 over here. And then they would see any missing designators or late designators that you put on the assignment over here. Any feedback that you put in Schoology will also show up here. So that's kind of what the students and parents see. And all of that is go to Synergy, look at your overall grade, look at your overall assignments there. Otherwise, dealing with the students, look for your scores and feedback on individual assignments in Schoology, work with it there. Right? That's kind of my recommendation is when you're working with students one-to-one to try to get them to succeed, focus on Schoology. That's where their stuff lives. If you're working with the student and family or somebody else, you need that overall grade. That's the time to go to Synergy. That's the official endpoint. All right, some additional resources. I'll share with you a link in just a moment for that grading technical guidance document. It's got all different kinds of scenarios for how to do extra credit, how to work with those missing things in Schoology, lots of other stuff that we've, developed with teachers and over the course of 2 years of using this. We've got all of our best practices there. 2, reach out to your colleagues. They're very knowledgeable. Andy, I know now that you can help your colleagues set up their grade books, right? Because some of them are going to be rusty as well. Or you might find that there's folks who have good knowledge and they've already been down this road. They know how to set it all up and they can help you. So however that works, your colleagues are a great resource. You have your STS in your building. It's very hit or miss as to whether or not they've done any work in Gradebook. They are not teachers, so they've never had that as part of their history of grading practices. So they lack that practical knowledge. Some of them, however, have been at trainings. They have taken the time to build their skills. They have worked with teachers and they've picked it up very quick. So there are a few, I think 1 or 2 at the high school who have some technical knowledge of how the Gradebook works, how Schoology works. But again, that's more instructional stuff and less the STS kind of hardware access kind of stuff that they deal with. So realize they may or may not be helpful in this area. Technical support, our help desk, extension 6688, or through Incident IQ, they're very helpful with a lot of technical stuff. Their skills have come a long way over 2 years and they can troubleshoot probably 90% of issues that teachers experience with their gradebook and their assignments. We also are building our knowledge base in there. So there's a lot of self-help articles for how to do stuff. And then lastly, when you want that, personal connection and face-to-face time, maybe you're working out your own philosophy or, you're trying to create a rubric that you've had somewhere else. That's where we can usually come in and help with that more design oriented stuff, that more, grading practices and philosophy type stuff. We've all been teachers. We all graded students at one time or another. And so we understand that part of a teacher's life and we get the philosophy behind it. So we also then have the technical expertise on how to set it all up. Let me grab this link here. I'm going to open this up so you guys can see it. This is our grading and technical guidance document. Miranda, I think you're going to love this. Any other teachers who are brand new? Melissa, I think you said did you move from elementary up? Okay. Yeah. So cool thing. I've had a lot of teachers in your scenario. My wife actually did the same thing. She's at Leota teaching 6th and 7th and 8th grade robotics and coding and I think study skills. She was able to actually bring a lot of cool standards-based scoring and other things that she knew as an elementary teacher into her practice in middle school and make it work. It's just a balancing act of now you're teaching one thing repetitively as opposed to all things to the same students. So that's a really challenging shift, but she found her grading practices are actually probably, I would say 6th graders might be some of the most advanced in terms of their grading practice because they've had to merge both elementary and secondary philosophies into their practice. So pretty cool. It might take some time to get there, but it'll be awesome when you do. Okay, I'm dropping this into the chat. This is a living document, so we update it fairly regularly. I don't know that we've gone through and added some stuff that's on our agenda to do this month before we start the year, but for the most part, it's very up to date. There's probably some references to a 50% interpretation scale instead of the 40%. I see one right there that I got to switch out, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Table of contents is alive. So if I want to get back to that gradebook setup in Schoology and Synergy, I'm going to go click on that title. It's going to drop me down here. There's a help document specifically for setting that up. Miranda, I'm thinking of you right here, just going into Synergy for the first time and setting up your assignment types. This is going to help you do that. And then when you get to Schoology, there's a short little 2 or 3 minute video for setting the final grade in Synergy or in Schoology to that NSD scale. Right, and some other information in here. Andy, you mentioned the turning off the visibility settings. If you didn't grab a screenshot or write that down, you've got a whole video on where those settings live right there. Don't think you'll have to do much with grading period selection. It's going to be, semester 1, 2022, 2023. Right, so I got to change that right now, 2022. 2023, right? It'll look like that. Melissa, if you're teaching 6th grade, you said, so you'll see quarter 1, 2022, 2023 as well.
Okay.
Right. I don't think you'll see year. I think that's going away. You might see a professional grading option. That's more for like courses that we build or other Schoology courses that are for professional learning, not for students. There's a whole video on just that syncing process and how that works, as well as explanations for the missing marks in Schoology, the marking something as incomplete. There's all these descriptions about how that stuff works. So if you're curious, if I mark something as excused in Schoology, what happens when I sync? Well, it shows you right here that'll actually be excluded in Synergy. Students will never even see that assignment on their Synergy side. So kind of cool. And there's some, some technical knowledge in here as well for how that looks. It'll actually show a little tiny red E in Synergy because it's excluded from that student's gradebook. There's a whole thing on late work in here, but I think a lot of that points to like a memorandum of understanding. I don't know how much this will change since we're no longer in the heart of the pandemic. We're kind of coming away from that. So I don't know what changes in regards to accepting late work. This is where I think we still need to rebalance accountability as a district. I think we need to set a little bit of a higher expectation. Because I have you and because you're listening and you're in the right place, I will share my thought on this. And that's that when I was in the classroom, I highly valued the idea of an interpretation scale and raising the floor underneath the students who were drowning in the ocean. However, that doesn't really account for students who refuse to swim, right? That's a different thing. Students who refuse to swim, I can't really help them. I'm not a lifeguard, right? I'm a swim instructor. A lifeguard needs to come in there. And the only way that works is counselors, admin, and family support, right? They're the lifeguards. I feel like I want that interpretation scale to be partnered with something that says if a student does not complete a certain amount of coursework, they cannot get a grade for that class. That is different from how I score things, and it decouples behavior from academic record, right? In all the research I did when I was the Gradebook TOSA, there are so many things that we embed in grading that are not part of actual academic ability, that are much more behavior-based or attitude-based or student approach-based, right? That we're trying to kind of disconnect. But if a student feels like they can do nothing in my class and then just turn in a couple assessments to get to a 60 and succeed, then that's also a broken system, right? That student needs to be aware that if they're not going to engage in the work and put in the effort of swimming, then they don't get to be in the ocean, right? We've got to figure out a different place for them to learn how to swim. And if that means an NC for that course, then that's what it means, right? I can have a whole bunch of data collected that supports the idea that this student hasn't completed the coursework to a satisfactory level. Therefore, they have not earned a grade, right? However, I don't think we have anything in any contract language or any philosophy that really, I think, accounts for that, that thinking. But maybe with more people on board for that, we can improve that and get a little bit more accountability back. Thank you for that, Andy. I appreciate the feedback. Okay, there's other stuff in here. I'm not going to go through each of these. This one's kind of cool. If you, in Synergy, because things are synced, you might not see the overall grade when you view your gradebook. There's a way to actually make that overall percentage visible again. And there's a quick little video to show you how to do that. If you're interested in individually assigning things to one student or a group of students, there's a whole section in a video on how to set up those groups, how to assign an assignment to one kiddo versus 5 kiddos. Kirsten, you talked about building a scale. This one specifically points to the 4-point scale, but I'm willing to bet that if you looked at that, you could probably figure out pretty closely how to build your 8-point scale. And then if not, then you can reach out and I'm happy to help you out either way. If you do extra credit, there's a whole section on that. Here's that grading column. If you're like a PE teacher, just observing things or however you're doing your paper recording of stuff, you just want to enter a score into the system. All those directions are there. There's even some troubleshooting there at the bottom. All right, where are we? Here are your regional coordinators. So if you can find your school's initials, you can figure out who to reach out to. And I don't know where we keep this document, but let me throw that in the chat too. I know a few of you are new and may have never heard your coordinator's name. So there's that one. And you'll see, I was a former English teacher. I like to collect letters. Apparently, I have quite a few schools here. There's Kenmore Middle School, IHS represented quite well here. I don't know if I have folks from other schools that I work with, but I know you guys are here. All right, that's all I got. 15 minutes early. Feel free to check out if you have questions or want to talk through an individual scenario for yourself. I'm happy to hang around and chat more. Otherwise, have a wonderful start to the school year, and maybe I'll see you at another training. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
See you around. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Hey, Gavin, thanks. As always, I did have a question about the 40% like clickable button in Synergy.
Okay.
Last year, we had to turn that on and off every time we sync to Schoology. Is that still happening?
I hope not.
Okay.
We paid Synergy to develop that tool for us.
Okay, good.
Yeah, without getting too deep into it, they had originally developed that interpretation scale for another district somewhere else on the other side of the country, I think in the East Coast.
Okay.
So that original district had wanted this tool years ago, and they paid for the version that was in there. And then we came along and said, we love this tool, but it's a time waster right now. Teachers have to constantly keep reclicking this. What would it look like if it was dynamic and you just turned it on and it applied to all these things that synced over?
Yeah.
They were like, well, yeah, I mean, that's great. Here's what it costs for us to develop that. If you want it, pay up. And so we're like, yeah, we'll do it. So we initiated that, I think, a year ago, and then it got put in the queue of things for them to develop. And it took a long time because with the pandemic and all the things that were happening, there were a lot of districts asking for stuff. And so they gave us a timeline of like half a year. I think we finally got this in like back in December or January of last year.
Mhm.
They went through, did all the development. They showed it off to us. We have not tested it yet.
Okay.
So we have it in our test environment, but the problem there is this is dealing with a sync from Schoology, all the data that we send over to Synergy, we then interpret in Synergy. It's really almost impossible for us to test that without going live. So we don't know 100% that it works the way we want it to. But the good news is if it doesn't, we have Synergy ready to do whatever else we need to do to fix it, to make it work. It just may take us a couple weeks or so to get it right. I have seen it work, and so I'm hopeful they designed it right. But it's humans at the end of the day building these things in coding for us to work. So I think it'll be just to turn it on once for your courses at the beginning of the semester or quarter, and you're good.
All right, that sounds great. I hope that works out is what I'm.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a communication somewhere buried in the thousands of communications that come out in September.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Welcome. Thanks, Lexi. Bye. Hi, Ms. Horst. Did you have a question? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.